You know, and I know what the cat's trying to say, but he keeps saying, just say, and Sammy, or whatever it is, you know, because nobody can live up to all that. And certainly, you know, it's very nice.
For decades, they were thought to be gone forever. Recordings hidden in vaults, gathering dust, or simply lost to time. But when Sammy Davis Jr.'s long-lost tapes were finally uncovered, what they revealed shocked even the biggest fans of the legendary entertainer. It wasn't just music, it was a window into the soul of a man whose story was as complicated as it was extraordinary. Sammy Davis Jr. was more than just a singer. He was a dancer, an actor, a comedian, and a groundbreaking figure who broke barriers in an era when racism still ruled Hollywood and Las Vegas. Known as Mr. Show Business, he dazzled audiences alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin in the legendary Rat Pack, leaving behind a legacy that few could rival. But Sammy's life was also full of contradictions, joy and pain, triumph and tragedy. For years, fans believed many of his personal recordings had been lost. When they were finally found, they painted a portrait of a man more vulnerable, more daring, and more complex than anyone imagined. Today, we're diving deep into the story of Sammy Davis Jr.'s lost tapes, what they revealed, why they matter, and how they changed the way we remember one of the greatest entertainers of all time. Before the lost tapes could shock the world first had to know who Sammy Davis Jr. really was. Born in Harlem in 1925, Sammy was practically destined for show business. His parents were vaudeville performers, and by the age of 3, he was already on stage, dancing alongside his father and Will Mastin in what became known as the Will Mastin Trio. From the very beginning, Sammy was a natural. His rhythm, his charisma, and his ability to captivate an audience made him stand out, even as a child. But behind the applause, his childhood was far from easy. Growing up as a black entertainer in early 20th century America meant facing segregation, prejudice, and rejection at every turn. Sammy didn't let that stop him. By the 1940s and 50s, he was dazzling audiences in clubs across the country. He could sing, he could dance, he could tell jokes, and he could impersonate just about anyone. He wasn't just a performer, he was an entire show rolled into one man. His big break came when he caught the attention of Frank Sinatra. Soon after, Sammy became part of the legendary Rat Pack, sharing stages in Las Vegas and redefining what it meant to be a star. But what the world saw on stage, the confident, magnetic performer, was only part of the story. The lost tapes would later reveal another side of Sammy, the vulnerable artist who poured his deepest truths into recordings that few ever heard. By the late 1950s and early 60s, Sammy Davis Jr. was living at the center of the entertainment universe. Alongside Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford, he became part of the Rat Pack, a group of entertainers who embodied cool, charisma, and showmanship. Their performances in Las Vegas were legendary, and Sammy was often the one who stole the spotlight with his boundless energy and versatility. But while audiences saw glitz and glamour, Sammy endured struggles that the spotlight couldn't hide. As the only black member of the Rat Pack, he was constantly reminded of America's racial divide. Hotels in Las Vegas welcomed him on stage, but refused to let him stay in their suites. He could perform for the biggest crowds, but was often barred from using the same facilities as his white friends. It was Frank Sinatra who fought hardest for him, threatening to pull out of shows if Sammy wasn't treated with the respect he deserved. Still, the racism cut deep. Behind his dazzling smile, Sammy wrestled with feelings of isolation and anger. And then came personal controversies. His marriage to Swedish actress May Britt in 1960 caused an uproar in a time when interracial marriage was still taboo. He faced death threats, public backlash, and pressure from Hollywood studios to distance himself from the relationship. The Rat Pack years gave Sammy fame and fortune, but they also exposed him to the harshest realities of prejudice and personal sacrifice. The lost tapes, discovered decades later, would reveal just how much these struggles shaped his art, capturing raw emotions that audiences rarely saw. For years, whispers circulated among music historians and collectors that Sammy Davis Jr. had recorded private sessions, tapes that never made it to the public. Some said they were rehearsal recordings. Others believed they were experimental tracks too daring for his label to release at the time. Whatever the truth, the existence of these tapes became part of Sammy's legend. Sammy was a perfectionist. He spent countless hours in recording studios, sometimes long after official sessions were over, experimenting with arrangements, improvising lyrics, or pouring out emotions in ways that didn't always fit the polished image his record company wanted to sell. These late-night recordings weren't meant for mass audiences. They were for himself, a form of therapy and expression. But as the years passed, many of these tapes disappeared. Some were misplaced during moves, others got caught up in ownership disputes, and a few were rumored to have been locked away by record executives who didn't see commercial value in them. By the time of Sammy's death in 1990, fans assumed they were lost forever. The mystery deepened when insiders hinted that the tapes contained some of Sammy's most personal work. Songs where he confronted racism, heartbreak, loneliness, and even his struggles with identity. Unlike his upbeat performances with the Rat Pack, these recordings were raw, stripped down, and unguarded. When the tapes were finally rediscovered decades later, they stunned everyone who heard them. They weren't just recordings, they were confessions, revealing the man behind the legend. When the reels were finally unearthed and played, the sound that emerged was unlike anything the public had ever heard from Sammy Davis Jr. These weren't the polished performances of Vegas showrooms or the carefully produced tracks his record label had packaged for mass appeal. These were intimate, vulnerable recordings that captured Sammy in his most unguarded moments. The tapes featured stripped-down versions of classics he had performed on stage, but delivered with a haunting depth. There were raw jazz improvisations, unfinished songs, and even spoken reflections between takes where Sammy vented frustrations about racism, loneliness, and the constant demand to entertain. For fans and historians, it was like stepping into his private diary. One recording captured him singing alone at a piano, his voice weary, almost cracking, as he performed a ballad about isolation. In another, he experimented with fusions of jazz and soul that hinted at directions his career might have taken had he not been boxed in by the commercial demands of show business. Perhaps most shocking were the moments where Sammy spoke candidly into the mic, as if forgetting it was recording. He talked about the pain of being treated as a novelty in some circles, the exhaustion of maintaining his cheerful persona, and his longing for genuine acceptance. For decades, the world saw Sammy as Mr. Entertainment, a man who could do it all with a smile. But these tapes revealed the cracks in that mask. They showed an artist grappling with the weight of fame, prejudice, and personal demons. For those who heard them, it wasn't just music. It was Sammy Davis Jr. unfiltered, brilliant, flawed, and achingly human. The discovery of the lost tapes didn't just surprise fans. It transformed how the world viewed Sammy Davis Jr. For decades. His legacy was tied to his charisma, his versatility, and his role in breaking racial barriers. But now, with these recordings, a new layer of his artistry and humanity was revealed. Critics who once dismissed him as merely a showman were forced to reevaluate. The tapes showcased his raw vocal power, his deep emotional range, and his willingness to experiment far beyond the boundaries of mainstream entertainment. For many, they proved that Sammy wasn't just trying to entertain, he was also trying to express himself in ways the public never got to see. Fans were equally moved. Hearing Sammy stripped of the big band arrangements and the glitter of Vegas made him feel closer, more real. Listeners said it felt like Sammy was finally speaking directly to them, not as a star, but as a man. Historians also noted how the tapes gave new context to his life. They illuminated the toll racism took on him, how deeply he internalized criticism, and how desperate he was to be respected as an artist, not just a celebrity. These revelations reshaped his place in American cultural history. The tragedy, of course, was that Sammy never lived to see this side of his artistry celebrated. For much of his career, he carried the burden of being misunderstood. Only after the discovery of these tapes did the world begin to fully appreciate the depth of his genius. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the tapes was how they revealed Sammy Davis Jr. as a man hiding in plain sight. To the world, he was the consummate entertainer, always smiling, always on, always ready with a joke or a dazzling routine. But in those recordings, you hear the exhaustion of someone who gave everything to the stage while quietly suffering behind the scenes. Sammy's personal life had always been complicated. He wrestled with addictions, financial troubles, and a constant struggle for identity. He was a black man trying to thrive in a white-dominated industry, a Jewish convert in an era of cultural divisions, and a performer whose relationships often became tabloid fodder. The tapes revealed the weight of all those contradictions. In one haunting segment, he paused mid-song and sighed, admitting that sometimes he didn't know who he really was off stage. It was a moment so human, so vulnerable, that it shocked even those closest to him. The recordings also highlighted the duality of his existence, adored by millions, yet lonely at his core. They captured a man who could make the world laugh, but who was privately questioning whether he was truly seen or loved. For fans, this revelation was stunning. The tapes reminded everyone that behind the sequins, the spotlight, and the Rat Pack swagger was a man who bore wounds the world never noticed. The tragedy, once again, was that Sammy never had the chance to fully share this part of himself. But through the lost tapes, his voice, vulnerable and unmasked, finally reached the audience he longed for. If the recordings were so powerful, so raw, and so deeply moving, one question remained: why were they hidden for decades? The answer lies in a mix of industry politics, Sammy's own insecurities, and the circumstances of his life. During his prime, record labels often controlled what artists could release. Sammy's brand was built on polished show tunes, jazzy swing numbers, and crowd-pleasing performances. His label executives wanted him to remain the smiling, multi-talented entertainer who fit neatly into Vegas showrooms and television specials. The tapes, filled with vulnerability, political undertones, and experimental sounds, didn't align with that image. They feared these recordings might confuse audiences or damage his marketability. There was also Sammy's own perfectionism. He was known to be incredibly hard on himself, often redoing takes again and again. For him, these late-night sessions might have been too raw, too unpolished to share with the public. He may have felt they weren't good enough, even though today they are celebrated as his most authentic work. Then came the chaos of his personal life. Sammy battled tax troubles, multiple marriages, and health issues, particularly after being diagnosed with throat cancer later in life. Amid the turmoil, these tapes were forgotten, left in storage, or shuffled between ownership disputes after his death in 1990. It wasn't until decades later that archivists, collectors, and family members pieced them together, realizing the treasure they had uncovered. The rediscovery was more than just finding old music. It was unearthing a hidden side of Sammy Davis Jr. that the world had been denied. The tragedy, of course, was that the industry, and even Sammy himself, didn't believe audiences were ready for this version of him. In reality, Fans had been ready all along. When the lost tapes of Sammy Davis Jr. were finally brought to light, the reaction was nothing short of electric. For longtime fans, it felt like rediscovering him all over again. These weren't just unreleased tracks. They were pieces of his soul, preserved in sound. Critics immediately praised the recordings for their raw honesty and stripped-down brilliance. Music journalists noted how they gave new weight to his artistry, proving that Sammy wasn't only a polished entertainer, but also a deeply emotional and innovative musician. Some even compared the discovery to uncovering hidden journals of a great writer, deeply personal insights that changed everything we thought we knew. Younger generations, who may have only known Sammy Davis Jr. as a Rat Pack icon, were stunned by how modern and fresh many of the recordings sounded. His willingness to experiment with jazz, soul, and spoken reflections made the tapes resonate far beyond nostalgia. They weren't just relics of the past, they were timeless. For fellow artists, the impact was profound. Singers and musicians spoke of how the tapes gave them courage to embrace imperfection, to allow vulnerability in their own work. They showed that even someone as seemingly untouchable as Sammy had doubts, fears, and moments of raw honesty. The public response was emotional too. Fans flooded forums and social media, sharing how moved they were to hear a more human side of a man who had seemed larger than life. Some said they wept listening to the recordings, feeling as if Sammy was finally speaking directly to them, decades after his death. The tragedy, once again, was bittersweet. While the world celebrated these lost treasures, Sammy wasn't alive to witness how deeply his unfiltered truth resonated. Still, the tapes gave him something priceless, a second life, one where his full humanity was finally seen. By the time Sammy Davis Jr. reached the last decade of his life, the weight of his battles was clear. Years of financial troubles, broken relationships, and the toll of being constantly in the spotlight left him exhausted. In 1989, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. A cruel blow for a man whose voice had been his greatest gift. He continued to perform as long as he could, but by 1990, Sammy was gone at just 64 years old. The world mourned the loss of one of the greatest entertainers of all time, but few truly understood the private pain he carried to the very end. That's why the discovery of his lost tapes was so staggering. They offered something his public persona never fully revealed: the sound of a man grappling with his humanity. They were not just songs, but confessions, capturing his loneliness, his doubts, and his unshakable brilliance. In many ways, the tapes gave him a voice again, one that cancer could never silence. They allowed the world to see the Sammy Davis Jr. behind the tuxedo, the jokes, and the Rat Pack swagger. They showed us the man who just wanted to be heard. Sammy Davis Jr.'s story is one of dazzling triumph and heartbreaking tragedy. He broke barriers, entertained millions, and stood shoulder to shoulder with legends. But only through the discovery of his lost tapes did we finally hear the voice he kept hidden. The voice of a man stripped of fame, stripped of performance, and laid bare. At 78, these recordings don't just add to his legacy, they redefine it. They remind us that behind every superstar is a human being, fragile and flawed, yet capable of creating art that touches the soul. Sammy Davis Jr. was Mr. Show Business, but thanks to these tapes, we now know he was so much more. So what do you think? Do the lost tapes change the way you see Sammy Davis Jr.? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden truths behind the stars we thought we knew. Because sometimes the greatest performances aren't on stage. They're the ones we discover long after the curtain has fallen.